The blade screamed against frozen asphalt, a long metallic scrape that ran up through the steering column and into my teeth. Dry air leaked from the vents and burned the back of my throat. Every few seconds, compacted snow thumped against the undercarriage hard enough to shake the cup in the holder beside me. Outside the windshield, there was nothing but white spray and the narrow tunnel my headlights carved through it. I checked the rear camera because I always did on the straightaways. 2 headlights were following me. That wasn't unusual by itself. Sometimes a rancher or a delivery truck got stupid and tried to tail a plow through bad weather. What made my skin pull tight across my neck was that the lights weren't bouncing. They weren't widening or narrowing with the grade. They stayed fixed in the monitor, perfectly level, like someone had painted them onto the dark. I checked the side mirrors. There was nothing there, no grille, no cab, no tires cutting through the powder. Just my own snow wake twisting in the floodlights and the black drop beyond the shoulder. The radio crackled with a burst of static so sharp it made me flinch. Then my own voice came through the speaker, flat and close to my ear. "You missed it again." I hadn't said a word. I looked back at the monitor. The camera feed had changed. Those same headlights were no longer out on the road behind me. They were inside the plow somehow, shining from the dark space behind the cab, too high and too close, washing pale light over the rear glass like something had climbed into the machine with me. I remember grabbing for the radio with one hand and the door latch with the other. I remember the heater still blowing. I remember thinking with a kind of cold clarity I wish I'd had years earlier, what had I missed again? It started 6 hours earlier with Colleen sounding bored and me thinking I knew that mountain better than my own driveway. Night shifts on State Route 212 had a rhythm to them, and after 5 winters on that route I could feel the shape of the road through the wheel before I saw it. The Absaroka Range had its own habits. You learned where the drifts formed first, where the wind knifed across the shoulder, where melt ran under black ice and made a lyre out of the pavement. You learned the smell of chain grease warming on a grade. You learned the difference between a good scrape and a bad one just by how the blade sang. That night should have been ugly. The radar showed a system broad enough to bury fence lines, but by the time I rolled out of the county yard in Park County, the storm had a strange stillness to it. Snow fell thick, but it fell straight. No gusts, no hammering crosswind, no sudden shove against the door panels. The world outside the windshield looked busy, but the truck didn't feel like it was fighting for ground. I noticed that because I noticed everything on that route. That's what I told myself anyway. I was in the county tandem plow, diesel full at departure, chains checked, salt load sitting right, hydraulics a little sluggish from the cold but well within normal. The cabin smelled like rubber mats, stale coffee, and the dry mineral stink you got when the defroster had been running too long. I liked solo runs for a big storm. No passenger talking, no second guessing. Just the engine under me, the scrape of the blade, and a road I knew by memory. Colleen Artis Fenwick handled dispatch that night. She'd been there longer than I had, and she had a voice that always made it sound like whatever she was saying came from behind a stack of paperwork. Not annoyed exactly, just resigned. The county had started recording certain dispatch briefings a couple winters before, liability, training. Some consultant out of Cheyenne had convinced the road department that if you set a thing into a recorder often enough, it counted as procedure. Usually the recorded call was for newer drivers or temps. I wasn't either of those, which was why I laughed when the alert tone chirped and Colleen came over the line reading from what sounded like a script. "You rolling for 212 north to the summit and back, Garrett? Already on it. Good. I have to give you the route advisories on recording. You've got to be kidding. Take it up with the people who don't drive in weather." I could hear paper shift near her mic. Then she read in the same tone she'd used to tell me toner had run out in the front office. Do not stop the plow for anything that is not physically blocking the road. I smiled to myself and eased around the first long bend out of the yard. That one I can manage. If you see headlights behind you for more than 3 minutes, do not check your mirrors. That got a snort out of me. What is this, campfire week? She ignored it. If the radio repeats something you already said, turn it off immediately. The blade hit a frozen seam and rattled the whole frame. You've upgraded from campfire to ghost story. Do not plow past mile marker 17 if your fuel gauge reads full. I frowned at the dash, then back at the road. My fuel gauge is supposed to be full when I leave. Just listen. Her voice didn't change, but I heard something under it then. Not fear, not exactly. More like impatience with an old bruise. If you pass the same snowdrift twice, you have already made a mistake. Keep driving. There was a beat of static after that. I waited for her to break character. Maybe tell me somebody in the yard had cooked these up for the new guys. Instead, she said, "Repeat them back." I did because it was easier than arguing. My tone stayed light. Hers stayed flat. When I finished, she told me to check in at the summit and signed off. That was the last normal conversation I had that night. I drove on with a grin fading off my face and told myself exactly what I would have told any driver coming up behind me. Mountain routes bred folklore. Every road crew had some version of it. Don't pick up hitchhikers past a certain culvert. Don't answer on Channel 4 after midnight. Don't turn around if you hear tapping on the hopper. Most of it started because isolated work made patterns out of noise, and because winter maintenance men liked to make the next generation a little uneasy. Still, I kept thinking about the way Colleen had said mile marker 17, not the number itself. The way she didn't round off the sentence or fill it with the usual dispatch clutter. Just said it clean and moved on. I knew that stretch better than any other on the route. Southbound lane pinched along a drop with old guardrail and shallow shoulder, built years before the county had money for proper retaining work. 3 rail sections, treated posts, 1 terminal end that had been repaired twice in my time there. Most drivers just called it 17. I knew where the frost heave puckered the right edge. I knew where snow liked to drift low against the beam and hide it till your wing caught sparks. I also knew how much force those posts would take before they gave. That wasn't a thought I lingered on then. I let it pass like a mile sign at the edge of my lights. The storm kept falling. Too stable, too clean. The truck kept its line. The vents leaked that same dry, biting air that made the inside of my nose ache. Under me, the steady thump of packed snow on the frame came and went like a heartbeat. By the time I climbed higher into the range, the dark beyond my headlights had flattened into something almost featureless. You could have told me the mountain had fallen away on both sides and I would have believed it. All I had was the lane, the blade, and the sound of work being done. It felt good. That's the part I hate admitting now. For the first hour, it felt good. The road was mine, the truck was behaving, and the rules sounded more ridiculous every mile. A few switchbacks later, I got my first chance to prove that to myself. The sound hit first, not from the engine but from outside it, a soft shushing drag along the shoulder like something large moving through powder. I backed off the throttle by habit and leaned forward against the wheel. The heater pushed hot, dry air at my shins. My wipers knocked aside wet snow in a steady metronome. Ahead, on the right side where the shoulder widened near an old chain-up area, I saw a shape hunched low beside the road. For half a second it looked like a person kneeling. A good driver doesn't panic at shapes. Snow made statues out of fence posts and mailboxes. Drifts bent around signs and turned them into shoulders, heads, folded backs. If I had stopped for every human-looking mound, I'd still be up on that route now. Rule 1 said not to stop for anything not physically blocking the road. It didn't say I couldn't slow, so I did. Not much. Just enough to feel superior about it. The engine dropped in pitch. The scraping blade changed tone. I kept the plow moving and steered a little left in the lane, aiming my lights more fully at the shoulder. What I'd thought was a kneeling figure turned out to be a drift built up around a broken delineator post and half a buried sign. The reflective strip on the post caught my beams in 2 points that looked a little too much like eyes, then turned back into plastic and ice. Nothing moved, nothing lunged, nothing followed. I laughed once under my breath. "That's one mystery solved," I said to the empty cab. The radio stayed quiet. That should have been enough to leave the rules alone, but false confidence is a smooth thing. It doesn't feel like risk. It feels like professionalism. It feels like you sorting real danger from nonsense with your own better judgment. I told myself Colleen's script existed for the same reason we put labels on hydraulic reservoirs and warning stickers on ladder rungs. Because eventually somebody would do something dumb, and management liked paper more than talent. By the next straightaway, I was already revising the whole thing in my head into something explainable. Headlights behind you for 3 minutes. Fine. Probably meant don't get distracted by tailgaters on narrow grades. Radio repeats your voice. Turn it off. Sure, loose wiring, feedback, full fuel gauge at 17. Maybe some old joke about a stuck sender unit. Pass the same drift twice, keep driving. Mountain roads looped. Wind built similar drifts. People got turned around. Every rule had a practical skeleton if you wanted one badly enough. I wanted one. The route climbed into deeper cut sections where the banks rose high enough to throw the truck's own sound back at me. The scrape of the blade came back twice, once through the frame and again off the snow walls. Salt hissed through the spinner when I kicked it on for a patch of packed glaze. The smell of hot metal and brine settled into the cab. I checked my mirrors, gauges, spreader feed, blade angle. Normal. All of it normal. I even radioed Colleen at one point with a quick condition update, more out of habit than need. She answered, took my notes on accumulation and visibility, and signed off without a word about the rules. I considered asking if she'd given the same script to everyone on mountain assignment. I didn't. I didn't want to sound rattled by a joke I was busy not believing in. That mattered more to me than it should have. People imagine guilt makes you timid. Sometimes it does the opposite. Sometimes it makes you protect the version of yourself that still looks competent from the outside. I didn't know then how much of my life had become maintenance work on that version. I crossed the first summit pullout and started the long northward stretch where the road ran exposed along the ridge. Normally the wind up there hit broadside and shoved plows half a lane if you weren't ready for it. That night the truck tracked straight as if I were driving through a tunnel. Snow kept falling, but the air felt dead around it. No buffeting. No drift plumes curling over the hood. Just that relentless white descent in still air. I should have respected that more. Looking back, the weather was wrong before anything else was. Somewhere before the county line kiosk, I saw movement again near the shoulder. This time it was taller, a pale, upright form just outside the right beam where the drop started down into dark timber. I slowed again, deliberately, testing the edges of the first rule the way you press a bruised tooth with your tongue. The thing resolved into a stripped lodgepole trunk leaning upslope, bark blown off one side and glazed white. Nothing human about it once I had it lit clean. Nothing happened. The road didn't change. The truck didn't cough. My skin didn't crawl. I just rolled on. That did more damage than if something had jumped me then. A bad sign would have made me cautious. Being allowed to get away with it made me careless. By the time I started the return leg south, I was almost enjoying the absurdity of the whole thing. I repeated the rules in my head with a kind of amused contempt, like old Union wisdom passed down by men who hated paperwork. Don't stop. Don't look. Turn it off. Don't go past 17 on full. Keep driving if the road repeats. It all sounded theatrical. Then the rear camera lit up. I heard the crackle of ice under my own tires before I registered what I was seeing. The monitor sat just above the dash cluster, a little washed out from glare and usually more useful for checking lane spray than for details. On a straight section, I glanced up and saw 2 white points hanging in the dark behind my spreader. Headlights. My first thought was simple annoyance. Somebody had come up fast from the lower ranch road and decided to tail a plow in low visibility. Stupid, but not rare. On a mountain route at night, you got all kinds. Men in pickups who thought 4-wheel drive made them immortal. Tourists following tracks because they mistook them for safety. Oilfield contractors already late and willing to gamble with county equipment. I checked the distance by eye. Whoever it was stayed well back, too far for me to make out shape or color. Just those lights, level and steady in the camera feed. Rule 2 floated up in my mind. If you see headlights behind you for more than 3 minutes, do not check your mirrors. I actually smiled. Not because it was funny anymore, but because it felt satisfying to have something ordinary show up in the costume of a warning. There, I thought, tailgater, mystery solved. I kept driving. The truck hummed. The blades scraped. Dry heat licked my knuckles where my gloves had worn thin at the seams. The road ahead curled left around a cut slope. On the monitor, the headlights held their distance. I checked the dash clock. A minute passed. I told myself the reason behind the rule was obvious now. Mirrors pulled your eyes off the road. A driver fixating on somebody behind him in those conditions could drift half a tire into the shoulder and never feel it till too late. Somebody had turned common sense into folklore, that was all. Another minute, the headlights never gained, never fell back. They didn't bounce with ruts or dip on grades. They stayed at exactly the same height in the camera, as if the road behind me had become flat while the one under my tires still twisted through mountains. By the 3rd minute, my jaw had set without me noticing. I started timing in my head by the sweep of the wipers because I didn't want to look at the clock again. When I got to what had to be 3 minutes and change, I looked in the left mirror. Nothing. No lights. No vehicle. No plume of snow. Just the black edge of the truck body, the wash from my own work lamps and darkness beyond. I snapped my eyes to the right mirror. Nothing there either. In the same instant, the rear camera went dark except for my own snow wake. The headlights were gone, not fading into distance, not cresting out of sight. Gone in the exact moment I violated the rule. A knot of cold pulled tight just under my ribs. The heater still blew dry and hot on my legs, but the rest of the cab felt suddenly undersealed, like winter had found a crack somewhere and slid one finger in. I checked the side glass, the monitor, the road ahead. Then I did what professionals do when they don't like what they've seen. I built explanations fast enough to keep ahead of the feeling. Bad angle in the mirror. Snow kicked up by my truck. Lens flare. Reflection from my own work lights through the blowing powder. If the camera lost contrast when I moved my head and changed the cabin lighting, it could create all kinds of false shapes. Anybody who'd worked enough night snow had seen stranger illusions. The road didn't care about my explanations. It kept unwinding south through the range, one curve at a time. But the silence after those lights disappeared felt heavier than the noise before them. Not quieter exactly. Heavier. The scrape of the blade had more weight in it. The undercarriage thump sounded farther away. Even the engine note seemed muffled, as if the cab had been packed in dense material I couldn't see. I reached for the radio mic to call Colleen and stopped halfway there. What was I going to say? That I had disobeyed a ridiculous rule on purpose and got spooked by a camera feed? I could already hear my own voice coming out wrong, trying to sound amused and landing somewhere weaker. So I kept driving. That's the sentence I keep coming back to. I kept driving. It sounds responsible. It sounds steady. Most of the time in my line of work it is. That night it was the first of several times I used duty to disguise something uglier. A long downhill grade opened up and I felt the weight of the load shift behind me. Snow rattled against the wheel wells. The vents kept breathing that over-dry heat that smelled faintly of dust and hot plastic. My shoulders loosened by degrees. The bad moment passed, or seemed to. Ahead, the lane reflectors blinked in sequence through the snowfall, and I slipped back into the work of watching edge lines, trimming blade angle, feathering salt. Then I heard myself say, "You're getting tired, Garrett." I hadn't meant to speak aloud. The words had just come out the way thoughts do when you've been alone too long in a machine. 5 seconds later, the radio speaker said in my voice, "You're getting tired, Garrett." I froze with one hand on the wheel. The transmission was clean, no static under it, no dispatcher click, no other unit stepping on the channel. Just my own voice, replayed perfectly, even down to the tired little hitch on my last name. Rule 3. If the radio repeats something you already said, turn it off immediately. I should have hit the power knob right then. Instead, I stared at it. Because there are moments when breaking a rule gives you a second chance to pretend nothing happened. If I shut the radio off immediately, then I was admitting the rules had authority. I was admitting Colleen had warned me about something real on a route I considered mine. So I waited. Just a few seconds. Enough to prove to myself it was feedback or a crossed transmission or some technical stupidity I could explain in the yard later with a wrench and a shrug. I cleared my throat and said, "Radio check." The speaker gave a burst of hiss, then repeated, "Radio check." Still my voice. I grabbed the mic. "Colleen, you getting this?" Static. Then softer than before from the dash speaker by my knee. "Colleen, you getting this?" The tone had shifted. Only a little. Same words, same cadence. But the second version sounded closer to the microphone than my mouth had been. It had a dampened quality, like somebody speaking from inside a closet full of coats. I felt the skin on my arms tighten. "Knock it off," I said. A beat passed. Then the radio answered, "Knock it off." And after another beat, in my voice again, but pitched low, almost conversational, it added, "You missed it again." That phrase hit me harder than the mimicry did. My hand slipped on the wheel for a fraction of a second. The truck nudged toward the center line before I corrected. The blade threw a fresh shower of sparks where it kissed raised aggregate. I had heard those words before. Not out loud, not from Colleen, not from any man on the route. They lived somewhere meaner than memory. They were the sentence my mind had found on bad nights without fully saying it. "You missed it again." I shut the radio off. The sudden quiet punched at my ears. No static, no dispatch chatter from distant county crews. Just the engine, the blade, the tire noise, the hiss of the blower. My own breathing sounded intrusive in the cabin. For a while I drove with the radio dead and my right hand still hovering near it, as if I expected the knob to turn itself back on. That's when I started noticing little changes inside the truck. The vent air cooled without the fan speed changing. Not enough to call it mechanical failure, just enough that the warmth on my shins thinned and the dryness in the cabin picked up a bitter edge like cold metal and pennies. The dashboard lights dimmed, then brightened. Once the wipers made an extra pass after I had switched them down. All small things. Small enough to deny. Contamination doesn't begin with blood or dirt. It begins with your tools no longer feeling neutral in your hands. I found myself looking at the monitor more often than forcing myself not to. Every reflection in the side glass made me tense. Every click from the salt spreader sounded like a latch working loose. The thought kept nudging at the edge of my mind that the voice on the radio had not just copied me. It had chosen a sentence that belonged to me. Something private. Something I had never spoken into a microphone. I wish I could say that was when I understood what the road wanted. I didn't. I only understood that I was no longer enjoying myself. A mile or two later, the snow in front of me thickened for no reason I could feel through the truck. The windshield whitened. The world narrowed. I backed off the throttle and leaned closer, tasting the dry cold on each breath. The blade scraped. Undercarriage thumped. Tires held. Then the snowfall thinned again as abruptly as it had come, and in the opening ahead I saw a drift on the right shoulder, curled around a broken sign. The signpost had snapped halfway up. The jagged end stuck out from the drift at an angle. There was a strip of faded reflective tape still clinging to it. I noticed it because the tape flashed once in my headlights and because something about the shape of the drift tugged at me. Not familiarity exactly, recognition. I passed it and kept going. Maybe 5 minutes later, after a left bend and a shallow climb where I should have been approaching a rock cut, I saw the same snowdrift on the right shoulder again. Same broken sign, same angle on the jagged post, same little flap of reflective tape. I tightened on the wheel hard enough to feel the leather seam through my glove. Rule 5. If you pass the same snowdrift twice, you have already made a mistake. Keep driving. Coincidence, I said to the dead radio. The word sounded small in the cab. Mountain roads repeated shapes all the time. Drifts formed in patterns, signs broke in storms. If I was tired enough, if visibility was bad enough, one shoulder feature could look like another. I knew that, knew it professionally, knew it the way you know ice is worse at dawn and diesel gels faster in wind. So I let the truck run on and counted landmarks. Ditch marker, curve sign, culvert lip under snow. Then a half-mile later, I passed the broken sign a third time, not another one, the same one. There was a gouge in the drift beside it where some previous blade had clipped too close and left a dirty crescent of packed grit. I remembered seeing that gouge. I was seeing it again. No turnoff, no switchback. No chance I'd looped back. The heater air smelled sharper now, as if the cabin filters had filled with ground brake dust. My tongue tasted copper. I could hear every grain of salt feeding through the spreader auger behind me. The road ahead hadn't become visibly different, but it no longer felt linear. It felt assembled around me section by section, enough to keep me moving, never enough to place me. I checked the odometer and immediately wished I hadn't. The miles made no sense for where I should have been. Not wildly wrong, just wrong enough. That's how the route worked on me then. Not with spectacle, with professional discomfort, with numbers half a degree off, and with memory. Because while I stared at that broken sign the third time, I remembered another night on that same mountain late season when I'd pulled over for an inspection after a minor slide report. No storm then, just old snow in the ditches and wind scraping grit across bare patches. I remembered my boots hitting frozen shoulder. I remembered the hand lamp beam moving across guardrail bolts, silver in the cold. I remembered pushing on the outer beam with one gloved hand and feeling more give than there should have been. I didn't let the memory finish. I shoved it aside and focused on the lane. Keep driving, the rule said. That part I could do. Looking back, that was the moment I stopped treating the route as ground and started treating it as judgment. The mountain gave me no horizon after that, just tunnel vision and recurrence. The snow kept falling in still air. My world stayed the width of a plow blade and 20 yards of beam ahead. The same undercarriage thump, the same metallic scrape, the same bitter dryness leaking out of the vents. I drove through it all with the careful stubbornness of a man who thinks precision can beat dread if he just applies enough of it. Then I saw the fuel gauge. Full, not near full. Not a bad reading from the movement of the tank on a grade. Full, pinned hard against the stop after hours of climbing, scraping, salting, and idling through storm work. I stared at it long enough for the truck to drift half a tire toward the right line. Rule 4 came back word for word. Do not plow past mile marker 17 if your fuel gauge reads full. The next sign out of the snowfall was the green reflective rectangle for mile marker 16. A dry sound came out of my mouth that might have been a laugh if anybody less tired had made it. Gauges stuck, sender units iced, wiring got moody and cold. I had seen all of it before. A full tank reading on a mountain run was wrong, but not impossible. The practical skeleton was still there if I wanted it. There had to be a reason the rule singled out 17. Something old, something mechanical. Some legacy-issue drivers passed around because nobody wanted to pay for proper repairs. I knew what legacy issue lived at 17. The sign for 16 flashed past. The road bent right. Then something happened that no gauge problem could explain. The engine vibration stopped, not the sound. The engine note stayed in my ears, a low diesel growl under the scrape of the blade, but the physical vibration through the wheel, pedals, and seat vanished all at once, as if the truck had been lifted an inch off the road and set on rails. The undercarriage thump cut out too. The whole machine kept moving through snowfall while the sensation of weight and contact went missing. I jerked upright so hard my shoulder hit the window pillar. That lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then everything came back at once. Vibration, road chatter, blade drag, the cup in the holder rattling. My pulse was loud enough to hear. Mile marker 17 stood ahead on the right, half crusted with wind-packed snow, green face dull in my headlights. I should have turned around, or stopped short and called it in, or done anything other than what I did. I kept driving. Part of that was inertia. A moving plow wants to stay moving. Stopping on a mountain road in active weather creates its own dangers. But the larger part was uglier and older. 17 had already taken one thing from me, and for years I had survived by refusing to treat that as real in the ways that mattered. I had signed papers. Use the right language. Let weather take the blame because weather couldn't argue. If I stopped at 17 because of a rule I had mocked an hour before, then I wasn't just acknowledging the impossible. I was acknowledging the place itself. The cab grew unnaturally quiet as I crossed the marker. No wind hiss around the doors, no grit clicking the wheel wells. Even the blower seemed to recede, though I could still feel that thin, dry cold coming through the vents. The world outside my lights looked padded. Snowflakes fell without sound. My own breath seemed too loud. Then I noticed the road surface ahead. Not different in color, different in texture. The plow lights hit it and the asphalt looked almost waxed, smooth beyond reason, as if fresh ice lay there without imperfections. My blade should have thrown chatter off a surface like that. Instead, the scrape went nearly musical, a single drawn note. I knew exactly where I was by what sat beyond the shoulder to my right. I couldn't see the drop in that storm, but I knew it was there. Steep enough to swallow a truck, timber below, rock cut above, old rail on the outside curve. I also knew the rail had been compromised before the accident. There it was, the memory I had not let finish. Last inspection run before Wade Tulliver Sorn died. I had stopped at that very stretch on a daylight pass. There'd been a report of minor shoulder sloughing after freeze-thaw. I got out with a lamp and a pry bar. The cold had smelled clean then, like stone and old snow. I checked posts, beam overlap anchor heads. 3 bolts on the terminal section had sheared at the threads. The rail still stood, but when I put my weight into it, it flexed outward too easily. Serviceable with caution if traffic stayed slow and conditions held. not safe for a bad night run in active weather. I knew the difference. Any decent maintenance supervisor did. I took photos. I opened the report on my tablet. I started the closure recommendation. Then I thought about budget review, holiday traffic, overtime, questions from men above me who never touched salt with their own hands. I thought about my promotion paperwork already sitting in an office downstairs. I thought about how many times I had been the one who solved problems instead of creating them, so I changed one phrase. Barrier serviceable. Monitor next maintenance window. That was the line that killed Wade. Officially, he lost traction in a whiteout and breached an otherwise functional roadside barrier. Weather event. Tragic. Unavoidable. I signed the paperwork that helped bury the truth, and then I went back to work because that is what competent men tell themselves they do when there is nothing to be done. The road knew all of that, as if answering the thought. The dead radio clicked on by itself. No dispatch tone, no burst of channel noise, just a voice speaking from the speaker at my knee. Still serviceable, Garrett? It wasn't mine this time. It was a man's voice I knew only from memory and guilt, calm, low, younger than I remembered because memory had aged him into an accusation. Wade. My hands slipped damp inside my gloves. No. The answer came out before I knew I meant to say it. Snow swirled in the lights. The quiet deepened. Ahead through the white, another set of plow lamps glowed dull amber. A truck sat in the lane in front of me where there should have been empty road. Not parked, moving. I eased off the throttle and closed the distance carefully, eyes flicking between lane edge and the silhouette ahead. It was one of the county's older units, a model we hadn't run on the mountain in a couple seasons. Boxier cab, different spreader housing, old livery striping under the snow crust on the tailgate. My mouth dried out so completely the air from the vents started to hurt. The truck's right rear corner was stove in, not fresh damage, old damage, iced over and preserved. The right work light hung crooked. The rear plow mount looked twisted. I knew that truck, not by number, by the photographs I had reviewed after the wreck, by the way the metal had folded when it went through compromised rail and clipped rock on the way down. I followed it at what felt like a respectful distance, though respect had nothing to do with what was happening to me. My blade kept scraping. My truck kept working. The other plow ahead left almost no spray, almost no wake, as if it were moving over a road no snow actually touched. I could see the driver through the rear glass only in pieces, a shoulder, the side of a head under a cap, one gloved hand on the wheel. Wade Tulliver Sorn had driven 2 partial winters for the county. Quiet guy. Reliable. The kind who asked specific questions and remembered the answers. He'd trained on portions of my route before taking full assignments. I remembered him once at the depot coffee machine tapping 2 fingers against the paper cup while he listened. I remembered him asking me not long before the crash if 17 had been fixed proper or just patched again. Serviceable, I had told him. The hand in the truck ahead tapped twice on the wheel. My stomach turned over. I grabbed the mic without thinking. The radio was already live. Wade, the truck ahead didn't react. Wade, if that's you, pull over. Static hissed. Then his voice came back, not through the road outside, but through my own speaker. Don't stop. The cab smelled strongly of cold copper now. My vents had gone from dry heat to something like winter blowing through a coin slot. I swallowed and tried again. You need to get off the road. No answer. The truck ahead held its speed. The damaged right rear corner shed no pieces, no snow, no sign of weight. It was just there, insisting on itself against everything reasonable. Then Wade spoke again. This time I could hear his engine nowhere, only his voice in my cab. If you stop, it gets in with you. A shiver went through me so hard my boot twitched on the pedal. I looked at the passenger seat, the rear glass, the dark above the hopper line in the monitor. Nothing but snow glare and dim cabin reflections. "What gets in?" He didn't answer that. He said, "Don't look right when the rail starts." His head never turned. I never saw his face. Helpful advice if you were generous. Or the kind of advice something gives when it wants you moving exactly where it needs you. That was Wade's ambiguity even then. Warning and lure braided together so tightly I couldn't separate them. I followed because I didn't know what else to do. The road around us narrowed, and every instinct I had from years of winter work screamed at me to increase distance, slow down, take control of my own line. Instead, I found myself matching his speed, because the one thing worse than following a dead driver's truck toward the stretch I had lied about was letting it disappear in front of me. This is the part where people like to believe truth arrives all at once. A confession, a revelation, a face in the glass. It didn't. It came in linked pieces. The first was the truck ahead, old damage and all, running the same lane Wade had died on. The second was my own truck beginning to behave like something else had learned it from the inside. The fan speed changed under my fingers before I touched the knob. The wipers made a pass when I only thought about clearing the glass. The radio volume rose slowly as if turned by a patient hand. The third was the headlights behind me returning. I saw them in the monitor, two fixed white points set in the dark beyond the spreader. This time I didn't need 3 minutes. I didn't need a rule. I kept my eyes off the mirrors and watched the feed in short glances. Every time I nudged left in the lane, the lights drifted left. Every time I corrected right, they moved right with me. They were not following the truck. They were following my choices, the thing behind me, whatever lived in those lights and in the voice and in the dead section of road, had learned my pattern. Or maybe it had always known it. Maybe the road had just been teaching me to notice. Wade's truck ahead hit a bump, or should have. The damaged rear corner didn't bob. It slid over the place where motion ought to be, and I understood with a deep animal certainty that I wasn't following Wade through weather. I was following an event through memory, a replay, a groove worn into the mountain deep enough for a man to fall into years later. I started talking because silence had become worse. "I'm sorry," I said, too low to count as speech. "I should have closed it, I know that." The radio breathed once, not static, breath. Then Wade answered, "I asked you." And that was true. He had. The afternoon before his run in the yard, with his gloves tucked in his belt and that little impatient tap of 2 fingers on the clipboard edge, he'd asked if the rail at 17 was solid. I had been signing off equipment assignments. I had not looked up when I told him it was serviceable. I remember that now more clearly than the funeral. My pen kept moving while he trusted me. "You were supposed to know," the radio said. The voice wasn't angry. That made it worse. The root bent gently and the right shoulder fell away into dark. I could feel the old geometry of 17 coming toward me in my hands. Post spacing, curve radius, edge drop. I had memorized those numbers years ago to do my job better. Now they rose in me like symptoms. I finally understood what really happened on my last inspection run, not in terms of facts, but in terms of action. I had not merely missed damage, I had stood in the cold with evidence under my palm and chosen the version of events that left me intact. You missed it again. No. I had found it and let it pass. The headlights behind me brightened in the monitor until they washed the whole camera view pale. My own outline reflected faintly in the rear glass. For a second it looked like somebody was sitting directly behind my seat, leaning when I leaned, breathing when I breathed. I kept driving because Wade had told me not to stop, because the rules said keep driving once you had made a mistake, because the only place left to do anything about the past was the exact place where I had failed before. Ahead, the guardrail started. I heard it before I saw it, a faint ticking under the scrape of my blade, metal cooling or flexing in the cold. The air in the cab went dead still. Even the vents seemed to stop moving it, though that same dry burn stayed in my throat. Wade's truck tracked the curve without drift. Mine began to feel light at the rear. The radio clicked, and Wade's voice changed. Not into another person, into narration. Calm, precise, the same tone I'd used in incident reports my whole career. "Rear axle light," he said. "Correction delayed." My truck's back end gave a small 6 slide to the outside. I straightened into it, countersteered, felt the blade bite and release. The radio went on. Shoulder edge hidden under loose accumulation. My right front tire dropped 1/2 inch, maybe less. Enough to tell me the packed line under the snow wasn't where I thought it was. Ahead of me, Wade's plow drifted closer to the rail. "Wade," I said, and my voice cracked for the first time all night. "Wade, don't." He didn't react, didn't turn, didn't brake. "Barrier gives at the terminal section," the radio said in that same calm voice. "Vehicle weight transfers outward." And then Wade drove directly into the guardrail. There was no scream of panic, no wild fishtail, no dramatic loss of control. That was the horror of it. It happened the way bad maintenance failures happen in real life, with a brutal efficiency that gives you no satisfying villain to point at. The truck's right side touched the compromised section. The beam folded where it should have held, and the whole plow tipped outward into the dark in almost the exact line I had seen years before in the photographs. For 1 second, the taillights hung there, slanted against the snowfall. Then the truck was gone. My whole body wanted to slam on the brakes,